Hello, my name is Jack Easton, and I'm going to be presenting today about training to improve aerobic and anaerobic power. This is coming from my exercise physiology textbook, pages 527 to 535. So let's get right into it. The purpose and overview of this presentation and what I read over in the textbook. Purpose is to examine how training methods improve aerobic and anaerobic power. The main focus is the intensity of the workouts, the duration, and the different physiological adaptations. The methods that are covered are interval training, or HIIT, or high intensity interval training, long slow distance training, or LSD, and high intensity training. The main goal for this presentation is understand how these principles apply to performance and health. And so here's a little graph that shows the difference between running time in seconds and energy contribution in percentages for each system. And so, for example, the ATP-PC system uses a lot of energy contribution in a short amount of time and then kind of dies out after a long amount of time. And you can see that with anaerobic and aerobic. Kind of increases over time. So aerobic power, we'll start with that. Capacity, it is the capacity to use oxygen for sustained ATP production. Anaerobic power is the rapid ATP generation without oxygen. And then the energy systems are ATP-PC, glycolytic, and oxidative, and then BIO2 max, the measure of aerobic capacity. And so that is the physiological background. Now, these are the general principles of anaerobic training. There's interval training is the first bullet point here. Like I said, high intensity interval training, or HIIT. It is short, intense boosts improve your VO2 max. And then LSD training, or long slow distance training. It's lower intensity, longer duration, and builds endurance. And then high intensity training, it's sustained 80 to 100% VO2 max, and then it boosts your lactate threshold. So hopefully it's not too hard for you to see this here, but I'll read it out. So this is the general principles of anaerobic training. Next we'll talk about the general principles of aerobic training, so hold tight for that. But for anaerobic training itself, there's ATP-PC training, and that's 2 to 10 second sprints or increased power and neural drive. And so it's like not a very long distance of time, but you're exerting a lot of energy. And then there's glycolytic training, that's 10 to 16 second intervals, and then increased buffering capacity. And then the final one is combined training. It uses both systems, glycolytic and ATP-PC, and it is important for most sports. So like soccer or football uses a little bit of both from both systems. So that's anaerobic training. Did I skip a slide here? Nope. Oh. This first slide that we were at before must have been aerobic training, and then this one must have been anaerobic training. Okay. Sorry, I mixed those up. And then there's training adaptations. Aerobic training is increased VO2 max, cardiac output, and oxidative enzymes, increased mitochondrial density, increased lactate threshold. And then anaerobic training is increased enzyme activity in ATP-PC and glycolytic pathways, increased buffering capacity, and increased power and short duration performance. And so these are little charts that I found on the internet. There's the resting heart rate decreases over time for aerobic exercise. Maximal oxygen consumption, or VO2 max, increases with aerobic. And then stroke volume also increases, but not as much as VO2 max. And then it's a little bit different for anaerobic. Strength increases with anaerobic the most. And then neural drive does increase, but not very much. And then physiologic cross-sectional area increases as well over time. The current research that they have done is high intensity intervals, or HIIT, increase greater VO2 max improvement than long slow distance, or LSD. They also found out that intensity drives both aerobic and anaerobic adaptation, and short, high-intensity interval training sessions improve cardiovascular efficiency and metabolic health. And I got that all from the pages in the textbook there. Now, practical application. This is the Denver Broncos coach, the best coach in the NFL right now. Who benefits from all of this information? Athletes do, patients, and the general population. It's good information to know. Who applies it? Exercise physiologists, trainers, and physical therapists all apply this. And then the implementation, you can blend high-intensity interval training with endurance training. That would be a good balance of application when you go to the gym. And the overall goal here is to improve performance, recovery, and energy system efficiency. Now, the summary here, aerobic and anaerobic power are trainable through intensity manipulation. Interval and continuous methods both improve performance, both of these. Balance workload and recovery to avoid overtraining. So balance these two so that you don't overtrain your body, so that you have room to grow. Break days are good. And small weekly progressions, like no greater than 10% are recommended. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a little chart that shows you the difference between aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic increases heart pump strength, decreases resting heart rate, decreases blood pressure, increases low intensity endurance, increases capillary density, increases lung muscle endurance, decreases body fat, and anaerobic increases muscle strength, muscle power also increases. There's decreased blood pressure, that's the same for both. Increased high intensity endurance, increased muscle size, increased connective tissue strength, and decreased body fat. So like aerobic, all in all, if you don't take anything from this presentation, remember this. Aerobic is like running, cardio. Anaerobic, you're going to use the anaerobic systems to do heavy weightlifting, as you can see down in these little guys. So the take-home message here, the key point is improving both aerobic and anaerobic power requires strategic variation in intensity, duration, and recovery. HIIT enhances both energy systems efficiently. Consistency and progressive overload drive your results or progression. And understanding physiology equals smarter training and faster gains, which is what we're all going for here. So I'm going to have some questions. There's only 5. I'm going to go through them all, then we'll go through them again, and I'll give you the answers for them. First question is, what factor most influences improvements in VO2 max? What factor most influences improvements in VO2 max? The first one is duration, the next one is intensity, there's frequency, and genetics. So think on that one. We'll come back to it. Question 2, which system dominates during a 100-meter sprint? A short amount of time, fast sprint. Oh, there's aerobic, glycolytic, ATP, PC, and oxidative. Okay. What adaptation occurs most with aerobic training? There's increased buffering, increased mitochondrial density, increased phosphagen stores, and decreased VO2 max. This is what adaptation occurs most with aerobic training. Which training method targets both aerobic and anaerobic systems? HIIT, LSD, continuous moderate training and stretching. Remember, HIIT is high intensity interval training, and LSD is not the drug. It It is long, slow distance training. Think on that one. And then the final question is, why is progressive overload important? A is prevents fatigue, B ensures continued adaptation, C increases resting VO2, and D lowers training intensity. Okay, think on those. We're going to go back to question 1. I'll give you the answers. So, what factor most influences improvements in VO2 max? Intensity. Which system dominates during a 100-meter sprint? That is the ATP-PC system. For a short distance, but very quick. What adaptation occurs most with aerobic training? That is increased mitochondrial density. And then, which training method targets both aerobic and anaerobic systems? We talked about this earlier, but that is high intensity interval training or HIIT. And then, final question, why is progressive overload important? And that is because it ensures continued adaptation or progression. Okay, that is the end of my PowerPoint. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the differences between aerobic and anaerobic training.